same time. And on the same day, when evening had come, he said to them, let us cross over to the other side. Now when they had left the multitude, they took him along in their boat as he was, and the other little boats also were also with him. And a great windstorm arose, and the waves beat into the boat, so that it was already filled. But he was in the stern asleep on a pillow. And they awoke him and said to him, Teacher, do you not care that we are perishing? Then he arose and rebuked the wind and said to the sea, Peace be still. And the wind ceased, and there was a great calm. But he said to them, Why are you so fearful? How is it that you have no faith? And they feared exceedingly and said unto one another, Who can this be that even the wind and the sea obey?
Good evening. It's good to be with you once again on this Lord's Day. Hope you had a wonderful afternoon. Our text this evening deals with something that can be found, an account that can be found in the books of Matthew chapter 8, Mark chapter 4, and Luke chapter 8. We're going to be looking at two of those accounts, Matthew chapter 8 and Mark chapter 4. We're going to be looking at those a little more closely. As we think about Matthew, we see in the book of Matthew chapters 1 through 4 the person of the King, which is Christ. We see in chapters 5 through 7, we see the principles of the King. In chapters 8 and 9, we see the power of the King. And that's what we're going to be looking at. We're going to be looking at the power of Christ, but our lesson has to do with something else. This account that was just read in your hearing by Daniel from the book of Mark chapter 4. But when we look at Matthew chapter 8 and Mark chapter 4, there are some things we can realize about this if we go back a little bit. As we look at Matthew chapter 8, we see first that there was a section of healing, showing Christ's power. We have him healing a leper. And not only did he heal a leper, I want you to listen to this in the book of Matthew chapter 8, verses 2 and 3. And behold, there came a leper and worshipped him, saying, Lord, if thou wilt, thou canst make me clean. And Jesus put forth his hand and touched him, saying, I will, be thou clean. And immediately his leprosy was cleansed. We have Jesus a little further in the book of Matthew chapter 8, beginning with verse 7, healing the sick of the palsy, simply by speaking the word. And we're going to make a contrast with something that is said in this section from verses 7 through 10 in just a few minutes. But when we look at this account, we read, And Jesus saith unto him, I will come and heal him. And the centurion answered and said, Lord, I am not worthy that thou shouldest come under my roof, but speak the word only, and my servant shall be healed. And then he goes on to say, For I am a man under authority, having soldiers under me. And I say to this man, Go, and he goeth, and to another, Come, and he cometh, and to my servant, Do this, and he doeth it. When Jesus heard it, he marveled, and said unto them that followed, Verily I say unto you, I have not found so great faith, no, not in Israel. So we have here two miraculous healings thus far. But then we go a little further to verses 14 and 15, when we see Jesus here going in to Peter's house. And when Jesus was come, verse 14, into Peter's house, he saw his wife's mother laid and sick of a fever. And he touched her hand, and the fever left her, and she arose and ministered unto them. We find in the book of Mark's account, when we look at Mark chapter 4, verse 34, Jesus not only healing, but also Jesus speaking in parables. So much so that in Mark chapter 4, verse 34, we read, But without a parable spake he not unto them. And when they were alone, he expounded all things to his disciples. So here the disciples were able to witness Jesus' healing of the leper, of the sick of the palsy, and of Peter's mother-in-law. And then they heard his teachings, his doctrines. And in the form of parables. And not only did they hear that, Jesus expounded those parables on them. When we think about the location of all this and where Christ was at the time, he was in the region of Galilee. And when we look at Mark chapter 3, verse 7, and Luke chapter 8, verse 26, we see that. And we see that Jesus was making this statement, and now it came to pass in Luke chapter 8, verse 22, on a certain day that he went into a ship with his disciples, and he said unto them, Let us go over unto the other side of the lake. Mark chapter 4, verse 35, he says, Let us pass over unto the other side. So here they were at this location, a lake, a sea, a body of water. This body of water is called by several different names in the Bible: Gennesaret, Gennesaret, Tiberias, but here it is called Galilee. It is called the Sea of Galilee, in the region of Galilee. And here we find Jesus and his disciples. And he told his disciples, Let us go over to the other side. This Sea of Galilee is 8 miles wide, 12.5 miles long. It is, on an average, 12 feet deep, but at its deepest point, it is 165 feet deep. Now, you may be wondering, why am I telling you all of this? You'll find out in just a moment. You see, there are mountains that are around this Sea of Galilee, and there are winds that will funnel through these mountains from the north and also from the south. The cooler winds from the north and the warmer winds from the south. And when they collide, they will cause, oftentimes, a pretty large storm on this Sea of Galilee. One man says, and this is a brother in Christ, the Sea of Galilee is one of the most beautiful and peaceful and restful bodies of water on the face of this earth. All one has to do is to either go to a Bible encyclopedia, but to really enjoy its beauty, all one has to do is to go to the internet. If you have the internet and Google Sea of Galilee, you'll see some spectacular pictures of the surrounding area of the Sea of Galilee and of the Sea of Galilee itself. There is something about its azure blue waters, one brother says, nestled among the surrounding mountains that instills peaceful, quiet rest. But he goes on to say, but due to the surrounding topography, it is subject to sudden torrents of wind that come rushing down through the mountain passes and churn those peaceful waters into angry waves which endanger the safety of small boats. It is even mentioned that there are some people in the past in recorded history that have seen a storm coming and knew that they were going to have to go on the other side of this Sea of Galilee, and they would hurry and skip their lunch just to make it over before the storm came. I want us to notice, number one, when we look at Matthew chapter 8, verses 23 through 27, we're going to read this, but we're going to notice something here, and it's going to be 3 points to this whole sermon. We're going to see, number one, we're going to see the insecurity of the apostles, of the disciples. Their unfaithfulness, their faithlessness, if you will. The insecurity of the apostles. Number 2, we're going to see that we have an influence, and there is an influence here that is mentioned. And we can see that. I'll show that to you in just a minute. And then lastly, we're going to look at the immutable teachings of Christ and His Word. The immutability of God. The unchangingness, if you will. When we look at the insecurity of the apostles, let us notice Matthew chapter 8, verses 23 through 27. And when he was entered into a ship, his disciples followed him. And behold, there arose a great tempest in the sea, insomuch that the ship was covered with the waves. But he was asleep. And the disciples came to him and awoke him, saying, Lord, save us, we perish. And he saith unto them, Why are ye fearful, O ye of little faith? And he arose and rebuked the winds and the sea, and there was a great calm. But the men marveled, saying, What manner of man is this, that even the winds and the sea obey him? We need to realize something when we look at the insecurity of the apostles. Number one, Jesus made a statement that can be reflected, if you will, as a promise. Let us go to the other side. In other words, we're going to the other side of this lake. They got in to the boat with Jesus. But you know what Jesus didn't promise? Easy passage. He didn't say that there was not going to be a storm. You know, when an individual becomes a child of God, some people believe that it's all roses from there. But friends, it's not. There are times of difficulty that come through our lives, times of temptation, times of hardships. And on the sea of life that we are sailing right now, there are storms that arise. When we look at the book of Matthew chapter 7, verses 13 and 14, here's how it reads in the King James Version. Enter ye in at the strait gate, for wide is the gate, and broad is the way that leadeth to destruction, and many there be which go in thereat. Because strait is the gate, and narrow is the way which leadeth unto life, and few there be that find it. Here's what is interesting about the Greek as far as verse 14 is concerned. The word strait there doesn't mean straight, but it means narrow. Narrow is the gate. And the word narrow here in the Greek means difficult. Did you know that? When we look at the Greek word, it means to afflict. Afflict. Narrow. Throng. Suffer tribulation. Trouble. Hard. When we look at the English Standard Version, here's how it reads, and I want you to notice the difference. For the gate is narrow, and the way is hard that leads to life, and those who find it are few. The way is what? It is hard. Just because one becomes a child of God doesn't mean there's not going to be storms in the sea of life that arise. Jesus here to these apostles did not promise them an easy passage. When we look at 1 Peter chapter 1, verses 6 and 7, wherein ye greatly rejoice, though now for a season, if need be, ye are in heaviness through manifold temptations, that the trial of your faith, being much more precious than of gold that perisheth, though it be tried with fire, might be found unto praise and honor and glory at the appearing of Jesus Christ. There are some things that we go through in our lives, some storms that we go through in the sea of life, that once we go through them and once we make it through that, you know what? We are better able to help others who will be going through those same storms of life. But God has not promised us that there will not be any storms in our life. There's going